Some things don't announce themselves when they arrive. They don't knock, they don't warn you. They simply appear in a moment you weren't bracing for, in a room full of people laughing, and they take everything you thought was solid and make it feel like paper. I was 63 years old when I learned that the life I had built for 4 decades was not entirely mine. It happened at our anniversary dinner. 35 years. My wife had planned it herself, the caterer, the backyard lights, the playlist that cycled through every song she claimed mattered to her. 40 guests, family, neighbors, people we had known long enough to stop really seeing. The kind of party that looks effortless because someone worked very hard to make it look that way. I had stepped inside to find a bottle of wine I'd been saving since our 25th. I was gone, maybe 4 minutes. When I came back through the sliding glass door, I scanned the yard the way you do when you return to a place, not looking for anything specific, just orienting. The lights were warm. The evening was cool. People stood in small clusters holding glasses, and then I saw them, my wife and my next-door neighbor of 11 years, standing near the back fence, half hidden by the rose trellis she had planted the summer we moved in. His hand rested low on her back. Not the way a friend steadies someone. The way a man touches a woman when he already knows the shape of her. She leaned into him slightly, her head tilted the way it used to tilt toward me, and they were not speaking. They were just close. The kind of close that doesn't need words because the words have already been said, somewhere private, somewhere I was never meant to see. I stopped walking. The bottle was cold in my hand. The yard noise continued. Someone laughed near the fire pit. A child ran past the hydrangeas. I don't know what I expected to feel. Rage, maybe. The kind that moves your feet before your mind decides. Instead, I felt something quieter and far more dangerous. I felt the floor my entire life tilt slightly, like a ship that hasn't capsized yet but has decided it will. My daughter appeared at my elbow. She had been standing nearby, I realized, long enough to have seen what I had seen. She was 29 and had her mother's eyes and my inability to pretend. Her face was composed in a way that told me her composure was costing her something. She said nothing at first. She took the wine bottle out of my hand before I dropped it. Then she said very quietly, "Dad, not tonight." I turned to look at her. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while. But if you say anything right now, she'll cry, he'll apologize, and by Monday, everyone will have decided you overreacted. Don't give them that." The yard carried on. My wife laughed at something my neighbor said. 35 years of anniversaries hung in the air between me and my daughter, and neither of us said a word about them. "Then what do?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Nothing. Tonight, you do nothing." I looked back at the fence. My wife had turned away from him now and was walking toward another group of guests, already smiling, already transitioning. He watched her go for a second longer than he should have. My daughter handed me back the wine. "Pour it," she said. "Smile. Trust me." I don't know how I finished that evening. I poured the wine. I gave the toast I had written the week before. I thanked people for coming. I watched my wife accept hugs and compliments. And I watched my neighbor shake my hand at the end of the night and tell me it had been a great party and that we should do it again sometime. "Absolutely," I said. The guests left. My wife moved through the kitchen in her bare feet, humming softly, loading glasses into the dishwasher. She seemed content, untroubled. She kissed my cheek before she went upstairs and said she was proud of how the night had turned out. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time after the lights upstairs went dark. I didn't pour anything. I didn't sit down. I stood at the counter where I had stood 10,000 times before, and I tried to locate the man I had been that morning. The one who believed the party was just a party. The one who thought 35 years meant something permanent. I couldn't find him. My daughter texted just after midnight, just 2 words. "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a while, then I typed back, "Tomorrow. Tell me everything. We met at a diner near her apartment. The kind of place that fills up fast on Sunday mornings with families and college students and older men who have nowhere else to be. She was already there when I arrived, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, her expression the same as it had been the night before, controlled, deliberate, and quietly heartbroken. She told me she had noticed things over the summer. Small things at first, the way our neighbor lingered at the fence when my wife was gardening, the way my wife's phone went face down whenever she entered a room that already had people in it. A weekend she claimed was a girls' trip to Portland that, when my daughter happened to mention it to one of her mother's friends, drew a blank look. She had not wanted to believe it. She told me that clearly, without apology. You don't want to be the person who brings that kind of news to a parent. You convince yourself you're reading too much into things. You give it time, hoping the thing you suspect will simply dissolve on its own. It didn't dissolve. 2 weeks before the anniversary party, she had seen them. Not at a fence, not in a yard. At a restaurant 30 miles from our neighborhood, a lunch that didn't exist on any shared calendar. She had been on her way to meet a friend, turned a corner, and there they were, sitting at a window table with the particular ease of two people who had long since stopped being careful. She hadn't gone in. She had walked to her car and sat for 45 minutes in a parking garage trying to decide what to do with what she now knew. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" I asked. She looked at her coffee. "Because I needed to know how serious it was before I handed it to you, and because I was scared of what it would do to you." That landed somewhere soft. "And now," I said, "now I think you need to know all of it." She reached into her bag and placed her phone on the table, opened to a photo she had taken of a document she'd found. "I wasn't snooping," she said. "It was on the printer at your house. I don't think she realized it printed." I looked at the screen. It was a lease agreement. A one-bedroom apartment in a suburb I didn't know well. My wife's name was not on it, but the emergency contact listed was her personal email address, the address I had written on forms for 20 years. The move-in date was 2 months away. The coffee in front of me had gone cold without me touching it. "She's been planning to leave," I said. It wasn't a question. My daughter nodded. "I think the affair is longer than we know, and I think she was going to wait until after the party, maybe after the holidays, so it looked like you'd had good times together recently." She paused. I think she was managing the optics. Something about that word, optics, made it worse. Not passion, not confusion, not a mistake born from loneliness. Management, planning, the steady, patient erasure of a life while the person living it smiled across the dinner table. "She doesn't know you know," my daughter said carefully. I looked up. "And that matters," she continued, "because if you confront her now, she's already prepared. She has a story ready. She probably has people ready to say the right things, people who knew before you did. But if we're patient, she'll make a move. And when she does, everything she says after that will already be on record." I sat with that for a long time. My daughter reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I'm asking you to be smarter than the situation for a little while. Longer." I thought about the night before. The toast I had given. 35 years, I had said, is not a milestone, it is a monument. I had meant it when I wrote it. "How long?" I asked. "Give it 2 weeks," she said, "maybe 3. I nodded. I paid the check. I drove home to a house that looked exactly the same as it had the day before, and felt completely unrecognizable. The following days had a texture I had not experienced since the months after my mother died. Not grief exactly, but a constant low hum of knowing something that changes everything, and having to carry it silently while the world expected normal. I went to my woodworking shop in the garage. I answered emails. I had dinner across from a woman I had slept next to for 35 years, and I watched her talk about her sister's upcoming visit, about the garden, about a documentary she wanted to watch, and I nodded, and I asked follow-up questions, and I was very good at it. She did not seem to notice. That was the part I kept returning to in the dark. Not the neighbor, not the apartment. The fact that she had been doing this, whatever this was, while I was right there, and she had not been afraid of being seen. Either she was very confident, or I had become so much furniture in my own life that I no longer required real attention. Both possibilities sat on my chest with equal weight. On the fourth night, I called my brother, not to tell him everything, not yet, but because I needed to hear a voice that had nothing to do with any of it. We talked about his garden and a fishing trip we'd been loosely planning for years and never taken. He laughed at something. I laughed too. When I hung up, I sat in my truck in the driveway for a while before going inside. The neighborhood was quiet. The house next door had its lights on. I thought about 11 years of borrowed cups of sugar and shared fence repairs and holidays spent in adjacent yards. I thought about the handshake the night of the party, the ease of it. Some betrayals come from strangers. Those are easier to process. The ones that come from the familiar, from the face that knew you, the hand that ate at your table, those don't just hurt, they rewrite the past. Every shared memory becomes a question. Was this real? Was any of it? On the seventh day, my wife told me she needed to go visit a friend who was having a hard time. She would be back by Sunday. She said it with the flat efficiency of someone reading from a list. I said, of course. I hope she's all right. My wife smiled and said she'd tell her I asked. I waited until her car left the street, then I walked through the house slowly. I was not looking for evidence. I was not looking for evidence. I was not looking for anything dramatic. I walked through the rooms we had painted together, past the photographs arranged on the hallway wall, past the bookshelf where her novels filled one side and my woodworking manuals filled the other, and I tried to feel what the house actually was now versus what I had always assumed it was. The guest room closet had boxes stacked neatly in the back. I recognized the organizational style, her handwriting on each label, the careful categorization of things by type. 3 boxes near the bottom were newer than the others. The tape was fresh. The flaps were sealed. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I called my daughter that evening. She picked up on the second ring. She's packing already, I said. A pause. How much? Enough. Another pause. Okay, she said. Then we move. She arrived the next morning with a folder of her own. The photo of the lease, printed, date-stamped with her phone's metadata. A summary of the date she had tracked, written out clearly in her handwriting. She had also, on her own initiative, spoken to our family attorney whom she'd known since childhood. Not to file anything, just to understand the landscape. Oregon is a no-fault state, she said, but assets accumulated during the marriage are divided equitably. The house, your retirement accounts, the joint savings, all of it is in play. What matters now is documentation of her intent to leave and her timeline. I looked at my daughter across my kitchen table and thought about all the times I had underestimated her steadiness. You sound like a lawyer, I said. I've been up since 4, she replied. We spent 2 hours going through what we knew. The lease, the boxes, the lunch she'd seen, the trip that wasn't a trip. None of it was dramatic. All of it was methodical. The kind of careful accounting that happens when someone has been planning something for a long time and has grown comfortable with the belief that no one is looking. She was wrong about that. What I hadn't expected was the conversation my daughter had with my wife's sister, who lived across town and had been a steady presence in our lives for decades. She had called my daughter 2 days earlier, not knowing what my daughter already knew, simply because something had been weighing on her. She told my daughter that my wife had confided in her months ago. Not about the neighbor specifically, about wanting a different life, about feeling like she had disappeared inside our marriage, about a version of herself she felt she had set aside somewhere around the time we stopped talking the way we used to. My daughter had listened without revealing anything. Then she came to me. She wasn't lying about feeling unseen, my daughter said quietly. That part was real. I sat with that for a long time. It didn't excuse the planning. It didn't excuse the quiet financial maneuvering or the lease or the handshake at the anniversary party, but it was real. And I was old enough to know that real things deserve to be acknowledged, even when they arrive inside a betrayal. I probably disappeared too, I said. My daughter didn't argue with that. It doesn't make this okay, I said. No, she agreed. It doesn't. My wife came home one Sunday afternoon. She was lighter than when she left. The particular lightness of someone who has been somewhere they wanted to be and has not yet remembered. They have to pretend otherwise. She asked how my weekend had been. I said quiet. She said she was glad I had rested. That evening she sat beside me on the back porch and we watched the sun go down over the yard together. The rose trellis threw long shadows across the fence. She reached over and patted my hand once, absently, the way you reach for something that is simply there. I didn't pull away. I let her because I understood something in that moment that I hadn't before. She wasn't a villain. She was a person who had made a series of choices, some of them dishonest and some of them cowardly, but she was also a person I had shared a life with, and that life had been real in parts, regardless of how it was ending. Hating her would cost me something I wasn't willing to spend. The decision I had been moving toward settled fully into place that evening, quiet and certain as a compass finding north. 2 weeks later, I asked her to sit down with me. She came into the living room and took her usual chair. I sat across from her. I had no folder, no document spread on the coffee table. Just myself at 63 in a room I had lived in for 11 years, saying what needed to be said clearly and without cruelty. I know about the apartment, I said. She went very still. I know about the apartment, I said. She went very still. I know it's been longer than recently. I know you've been preparing, and I know that some of what you've been feeling has been real, even if the way you handled it wasn't. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes filled, and I could see her searching for the version of this conversation she had rehearsed, the one where she could explain, reframe, redirect. I didn't give her room to start it. I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself, I said. I'm not looking for that. What I need from you now is honesty about the finances. Everything that's moved, everything that's been allocated, everything that's been allocated, everything that's been prepared without my knowledge. I have documentation. The question is whether we do this through attorneys in rooms we don't choose, or whether we sit across from each other and decide it ourselves. She looked at the floor. I didn't want you to find out this way, she said. I know, I replied, but I did. She exhaled slowly. When she looked up, the performance was gone. What was left was just a person who was tired and sad and had been carrying something heavy and was now, finally, putting it down. I'll be honest, she said. About all of it, she was. It took 2 evenings. There were tears, most of them hers and some of them mine. There was no shouting. There was no revisiting of old grievances to score points. There was just the slow, difficult process of 2 people accounting for a life they had shared and were now, carefully, separating. The neighbor was not, it turned out, a great love. He was a habit that had grown into a plan. He had offered her an exit at a moment when she had convinced herself she needed one. Whether that would last was not my concern. I told her that. She looked at me for a long moment. You're not angry, she said. I was, I replied. I had some time with it. She nodded slowly. I thought you'd be different about this. Looder. Loud wouldn't have helped either of us, I said. She moved out 6 weeks later. The boxes she had already packed made it faster than it might have been. My daughter came over on the day of the move and sat with me in the kitchen until the last car was loaded. We didn't watch from the window. We drank coffee and talked about nothing important, and let the sounds of departure happen in the next room without commentary. When the door clicked shut for the last time that day, my daughter looked at me. How are you? I thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm not pretending. She smiled and refilled my cup. The months that followed had a different texture than I expected, not the hollow ache of someone abandoned, more like the particular silence of a house learning to be a different kind of home. I opened the windows more. I let projects pile up in the shop and then worked through them at my own pace. I cooked things that took time, the kind of meals that don't make sense for one person, but that I made anyway because the process itself was something. I went to therapy. I told the therapist I wasn't broken, just recalibrating. He said those were not mutually exclusive. I decided I liked him. My brother and I finally took the fishing trip. 4 days in a rented cabin on a lake in Montana that was too cold in the mornings and exactly right by noon. We didn't talk about my wife much. We talked about our father, who had been gone for 12 years, and about the kind of men we had tried to become, and about whether we had managed it. The verdict was inconclusive, which felt honest. The neighbor never spoke to me directly about any of it. He waved once across the fence a few months after the separation. I waved back. There was nothing left to say that the situation hadn't already said more clearly. I still live in the house. I replanted the rose trellis last spring, on my own, which took longer than it should have and turned out better than I expected. There is something clarifying about working with your hands on something that simply needs doing. The thorns drew blood twice. I kept going. What people call quiet strength is often just the absence of a better option. You are quiet because you understand that noise will cost you more than it gains. You are patient because you have lived long enough to know that most situations eventually present their own evidence, and that the truth, if it is true, does not actually require your help to surface. It only requires that you do not get in its way. What I know now, at 63, standing in a yard that is mine alone, is this. 35 years was not wasted. Some of it was good and real, and I was present for it. The ending does not rewrite the years that were genuine. I have a daughter who sat across from me in a diner and decided I deserve the truth, and I have a brother who will drive 16 hours for 4 days on a cold lake, and I have a shop full of things I built with my own hands that do not lie. That is not a small life. The hardest part was not the betrayal itself. It was a moment on the back porch, watching the sun go down, when I understood that she had stopped seeing me, and I had let that happen too slowly. To stop it. Not because I didn't care. Because I had confused endurance with connection. Because I had told myself that the absence of conflict meant the presence of peace. Because I had stayed quiet in moments when speaking would have cost me something. And that silence, extended over years, had become a room she no longer wanted to be in. I don't say that to excuse her choices. I say it because it is honest, and because at 63, I would rather carry a harder truth than a comfortable one. If you are living in a house that has grown quiet in the wrong way, not the warm quiet of two people who no longer need to fill every moment with words, but the cold quiet of two people who have stopped trying, do not wait until the silence becomes a plan someone else has already made without you. Say the thing. Risk the discomfort. A conversation that costs you something in the moment costs far less than a decade that cost you everything. And if you find yourself at the end of something, standing in a yard you know better than you know yourself, watching the evening settle over a life you are rebuilding from whatever is left, know that rebuilding is not failure. It is the most honest form of courage there is. The house is quiet now. It is my kind of quiet. I am still here. If this landed with you, if you have ever been the last person to know something that changed everything, or if you've ever chosen patience over confrontation and wondered whether that made you strong or simply slow to act, I'd like to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you are in the world and what you're carrying. We read everyone. There are more stories here. Stories about men who stayed quiet for the right reasons, and men who stayed quiet too long, and the hard work of knowing the difference. If you want to hear them, subscribe. We'll be here. Sometimes the life that comes after is the one you are always capable of living. You just needed the space to find it.